Webcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining the webcast here with Cyren this morning. We're just waiting for a few more people to join, so if you don't mind, we're just going to pop on mute and just give it 2 more minutes for all participants to join the call. Right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining the Cyren WebEx this morning in partnership with AIT. Apologies for the slight delay there in starting. We were just waiting for everyone to join. Excuse me. Hopefully you can all see my screen right now. I will be passing over to a colleague in a moment. I'll explain right through. Unfortunately, he's not at his desk because we've had a fire alarm that's gone off within one of the offices where we're located. So he's just making his way back to his desk now. But just as a way of introductions, today throughout the call you're going to hear from myself. My name is Zoe Clark. I'm the Channel Sales Director here at Cyren. And we'll also be hearing from Stuart Grierson, who is our senior sales engineer from the technical side. So first off, I'd like to go through and introduce you to Cyren, who we are, what we do, and then of course I'll be passing over to Stuart in a moment for him to take you through the actual overalls of the product. So we'd like to keep this morning as interactive as we possibly can, so please do feel free, if you have got a question throughout the call, please do tap away into the chat box that is available for you, and I'll make note of those questions and we'll come back to you with the answers either throughout the presentation or address them individually at the end. I'm sure we will also then open up the call at the end for any questions that anyone may have if you wish to ask, rather than tap away in the comments box. So, Cyren, who are we? You can see my screen there where we have a number of very large numbers that reside there. Cyren is an organisation who offer a huge cloud offering that currently protects and detects through numerous different users. So we have 25 billion security transactions that take place on a daily basis through our security cloud, giving us in total about 1.3 billion users that are protected. And therefore, with those huge numbers, that's therefore giving us around 300 million threats that we are blocking daily. Now, you can see underneath there, we've got a multitude of different organizations and very recognizable companies that are listed. Though all of those companies that are listed there are utilizing Cyren in one shape or form. And when I say one shape or form, in the sense that our heritage and where we have originated from is from a business that has been creating OEM threat feeds into organizations such as the likes of Google, Microsoft and Zscaler and Sophos, as you can see there, offering them some level of threat feed back into Cyren, into our cloud, that is giving us therefore that threat intelligence that is building those overall numbers. With that, we have taken that whole cloud together and we now have a full security suite offering through from web, email, sandboxing and DNS security that Stuart will talk us through in a little bit more detail. So I shall just check to see whether Stuart has managed to get back to his desk following the fire alarm. Stuart, are you online now?
Yeah, good morning. I am back with you.
Okay, so shall I change? I will change the screen, Stuart, to make yourself presenter.
Okie dokie.
Okay, and then I think we're ready for you when you're ready.
Okie dokie. Cool. So hopefully everyone can see the screen being shared now. So this slide is really just to set a little bit of background and the things that we see happening on the internet and over email, really, day by day, week by week. And some things have obviously changed substantially, and it's an ever-evolving landscape in terms of web threats and in terms of email threats. So some of the key statistics that we've listed on this slide is actually we see that the median time today between the very first malicious link being sent in an email, for example, here's a phishing campaign, it takes about 1 minute and 40 seconds on average for somebody to click on that link. So effectively, that's the time you've got from a brand new URL being sent to be able to recognize and block that URL from being accessed to stop the very first infection. We also see that more than 50% of phishing sites now last less than 24 hours. So they're normally a new domain that's registered, a site is put up, a link is sent, or not always in that order. So sometimes a link is sent and then 6 hours later a site is put up, and they'll time the sending of a link for say 2 in the morning. So if any solutions try and scan that link there and then, there'll be nothing there. When someone comes in the morning and there's a mail in the mailbox, there's actually a site there waiting just to steal credentials in the example of phishing. Now, some of the outbreaks that we see, now the outbreak is kind of email focused, but obviously most threats today are now blended in some way. We saw an outbreak of JAF ransomware, which perhaps is not as well known as some of the ones that have been in the media more recently, but we saw 5 million emails an hour. So that's the kind of size of outbreak that we see sometimes with ransomware. Sort of back to web a little bit, we see that close to 40% of all malware today is distributed via SSL, and that's an important point because you know, a lot of web security solutions today either support SSL, but it requires, you know, a large amount of processing power, and it adversely affects other functions on things like a UTM, or organizations haven't enabled SSL because of some of the challenges they get around that in scaling and other things that obviously being in the cloud we can help with. And the other things, so a couple of other things I'd just like to touch on is that 4 out of 5 people basically that do our web diagnostic test, which is a free test you can run on our website that will just test how your current web security behaves and whether or not it blocks sites that we know are phishing. 4 out of 5 people fail that, and of the people that fail, 91% of those fail the phishing URL. So if it's a brand new phishing site, 91% of the time, people that are running that test, which are mainly business users, are actually able to access that 0 hour or that 0 day phishing site. So that kind of sets a bit of background. That's what we see today across the data centers and then some of that infrastructure that Zoe was kind of talking through and those transactions we see. And because of that sort of picture and because of the state of things right now, using an appliance to try and protect against web security, and it's a fairly bold statement, but using an appliance it's just too slow, right? If you look at that clicking on a phishing link taking 1 minute and 40 seconds, I'm not aware of any security appliances that update the URLs in a 2-minute window, right? Typically, a lot of the time they're kind of every 24 hours with perhaps some particular categories being updated every 2 hours, 4 hours. And obviously that relies on it actually working, being able to get out and download that gig file or whatever at the time. So we're just seeing, you know, it's basically too slow. And if you look at as a whole, if you want to call them threat actors or bad actors or whatever, but the bad guys in this situation are utilizing cloud to distribute attacks. And in some situations, we're trying to use a piece of tin in a data center to protect against those attacks, and it really doesn't add up. So what we're doing, and our absolute aim, and what we feel we are achieving today, is providing the fastest time to protection in the market. And it's because of the data that we see and on our footprint globally across data centers, across customers in both our space or in our OEM space. We're able to block threats before they reach a user's inbox or browser. So we're talking about up to the minute detection of brand new phishing sites, brand new malware sites. And because it's all cloud-based, it's obviously high performance, lower cost, TCO, etc. And the way that the solution's been built is that it is very easy to implement. And there are different levels that you can implement at. Yeah, I mean, there's different levels you can implement at, but each one of them provides a very high level of security, especially from these new and unknown threats. So what have we got as a product, which is not really spoken about yet? We have a Cyren Internet Security Platform. Within that platform, we have it's 100% cloud-based, and we have web security and email security. It's kind of the 2 primary vectors along with DNS security. So those are kind of our vectors that we protect today. And then in addition, we have cloud sandboxing, which I won't go into too much detail on today, but really it's a way of detecting completely unknown threats. But the important thing to take away is that all of these technologies are working all the time for our customers, but also across a lot of that traffic that we were talking about in the first slide. There's 25 billion transactions. They all get fed into these kind of detection engines, and we're able to identify unknown threats in the wild by using things like our sandboxing technology and our awareness of the dangerous IP addresses, hosts, applications, etc. as well. So it's a constantly building knowledge or database, if you like, that we have there across data centers. So for today, for this webinar, we're going to focus a bit on web security. And then I plan to go into the console for DNS to show you what the DNS piece looks like, and also perhaps even go into a live demo of how simple that is to set up to add a very easy layer of quite advanced protection in the environment. So the web security platform is really, as with all the solutions that Cyren offer to enterprise, is completely cloud-based. So it's a 100% cloud solution, and effectively we would sit between your devices, your offices, your roaming users, pretty much anything that's connected to the internet in your environment or outside of your environment, but under your control, through our web security solution, and protect it from those threats. In addition to protecting from threats, and we can also obviously apply policy. So we can control whether users or machines or whatever are able to access things like, should they be able to use Dropbox on Wikipedia, and there's a whole application definition piece in there as well. But that's effectively where we sit. What we have is DNS servers across multiple data centers that you can query, and I'll touch on that in a bit more detail when we go through DNS. But we also have proxy servers. We have a total of 19 data centers worldwide. Basically, we will send a user's traffic in a web security deployment to the closest proxy server to them. And all of that we work out dynamically so as to minimize latency. And make sure that user's browser traffic is in the right language, prices are in the right currency, etc. So that's what it looks like. It's very simple to deploy, and I will show you the UI so you'll get an idea of exactly how simple, but it does provide a very high level of security. And in the web security piece, we can also inspect SSL traffic. And when I say inspect SSL traffic, I do mean looking inside that traffic. So doing a graceful man in the middle inspection on the traffic, and actually doing a live scan for malware, etc. within that. From a reporting perspective, we prove the value that we're adding back to you. So we give you visibility of what your users are doing, what kind of threats are affecting them that we're now blocking for them, and some nice, so as well as some low-level reporting. You can dig right into the reads if you want to. There's some really nice high-level reports in there. Both from an admin perspective, but also there's some more sort of management level reports as to, hey, what's this solution doing for us? And it's flexible, right? Because we're not on an appliance. We are in the cloud. So there are different ways to get traffic to us, but one of the ways is using a client. And we have a client available for Windows, Mac, Android, and also profiles for iOS and Windows Mobile. So effectively on any device, you can send the traffic to us, and it doesn't matter where that device is. So right now, a lot of organizations still have some kind of perimeter appliance doing their web security. And typically for somebody to have the same level of security when they're outside the office, they need to be using a technology like a VPN, or perhaps using something like Direct Connect if the environment allows it. But they're reliant on having the traffic logically originate from inside their network, so that it goes out through the egress point and therefore through the local UTM or local proxy server. What we're seeing is that, especially in the case of VPN, there's less and less need. So as cloud application adoption happens, there's less and less need for people to VPN in. Myself, we have Cyren, we use technology like Office 365, right? So if I'm not working in the office, I have no need to connect to VPN unless I need to get to something like our bug tracking system or some other internal resource. And that tends to be the way, for most companies. There is less reason now to connect logically back into the network, and therefore the end result is that actually, whilst people are more mobile and have access to resources everywhere, they're actually running less security. So if we break down the web security into, it's kind of there's a bit more to it than this. This is really a simplified technology stack, but if we break it down into some key areas, the first thing we're able to offer is URL filtering. So we can look at who the user is, which location they're at. We can look at the time of day that it is, and based on that, we can decide whether that user should be allowed to get to that category of website. And there's as you'd expect, 70 or so categories in there. You can allow a block. Where we're particularly strong in that category area is with those 0-hour categories. So things like malware and phishing. We've actually recently added a cryptocurrency mining category, which fits within that as well, and as well as command and control server URLs. So the strength is really in the speed of updates to categories, because if you talk about category blocking, you don't really talk about that normally as a security feature in any particular depth, right? Because you're looking at a URL and saying yes or no. But if you're able to keep that URL list up to date by using traffic that you see over email. So for example, we're looking at a whole bunch of email traffic daily and extracting URLs. So that first phishing email that comes through our system, we look at the URL in it, we'll visit the site, we'll have a look at the IP of it, we'll have a look at things like the registrant information, what application is there. We'll compare that back to what we know from previous attacks. And we can very quickly make a decision that actually, yes, this is a 0-hour phishing URL that we've just seen in the wild over email, and actually push that straight into our 0-hour phishing category. So it basically makes URL filtering security relevant again, where it hasn't been for a while, or it isn't in a number of solutions. Moving on from that, we're actually able to do dynamic web reputation. So say we've never seen the URL before, we're able to use the same sort of checks I was talking about we used over email. So looking at where it's hosted and who the registrant is and what we've seen hosted there before, and actually make a dynamic risk calculation there and then. So let's say that particular URL has never been seen over email, and the only way it's delivered is over Facebook or something, or over Facebook Messenger. Then the first time we'll see it is when someone tries to visit it through web. But we can make that analysis there and say, actually, we think that site is probably good or probably bad, and then either block access to it or allow access to it, depending. Moving on from that, in proxy mode, we have anti-malware scanning. I say scanning, it's really an anti-malware platform. We have dual engines here, and we have quite advanced heuristic detection. There are different levels of heuristics. Most anti-malware engines will tell you they have heuristics, but we're really looking at expected behavior of a payload. We're not saying, does this look a bit like something else we saw? We can use technologies like emulation and technologies like rule sets to figure out what the expected behavior of a payload is, rather than does it look a bit like this other payload we've seen before. So it's quite advanced heuristics, and we do use technologies in there like machine learning as well, all as part of that anti-malware platform. If it gets through that and we're still not sure, we can't make a positive identification or a negative identification of a payload, that's when we can invoke our sandbox array. What's quite unique about our sandbox array is that actually we have multiple sandboxes. So we sort of looked at the market, instead of investing in creating our own sandbox environment or our own sandbox, we looked in the market and saw there's a lot available. There's open source and commercial and even some sandbox solutions available. And what we did is we actually went and evaluated a whole bunch of different sandboxes. And rather than picking a provider, and you'll find with a lot of web security solutions, they've teamed up with a provider to provide the sandboxing tick box, if you like. We actually took on a whole bunch of different sandbox technologies and installed those in an array. So what we have the ability to do is actually run a payload in multiple different sandbox technologies with multiple different operating systems. And in actual fact, we've invested in physical hardware as well. So we actually have banks of physical hardware in data centers that we can also analyze payloads on. So effectively, for things like particularly evasive malware or sandbox aware malware, we can run it in a multitude of different environments, running different underlying technologies to actually decide if we think a payload is good or bad. Now, the nice thing about this is that's really advanced technology, right? And that's kind of the technology that's been in the very high end of the market. And when I say the very high end of the market, I'm talking about large financial institutions and those kind of environments is where they're able to use anything even similar to this sandbox array technology. And what we're doing is we're using cloud to make that available to the wider population, if you like. It's very advanced security, but we look after the back end of it. And in terms of management, and I've mentioned it's simple a few times, but in terms of management, there's a slider there that turns sandboxing on or off, which I can show you. So we really are providing quite an advanced level of security there with a very low level of complexity. So that's web. I also wanted to touch on today the DNS security, and the reason I wanted to touch on the DNS security is because it is the simplest, but it's a very easy entry-level way to get access to things like our knowledge of zero-hour phishing URLs and zero-hour malware URLs, and it's very easy to integrate with things like access points without having to touch anybody's machines or set up group policies or anything like that. We can simply operate with something like a switch or access point or a Windows DNS server. So the way that the DNS piece works is it's a very simple configuration. So on your current DNS server or your DNS forwarder, which in a wireless or guest wireless environment might be an access point, and a domain environment is more likely to be a Windows machine running DNS services, your DNS is typically pointed to your ISP or a Google DNS server or someone of that vein. What we can actually do is actually send external DNS requests. Instead of sending it there, send it to Cyren. And we can have a look at the domain that's being requested and see what we think of it. And if we say, okay, actually, what's actually happened here is somebody's requesting the IP address of a domain that we know is a zero-hour phishing domain. Instead of providing back the correct IP address, we will provide back the IP of a block page. So the person clicking that link will receive a block page that says this is blocked as a phishing URL, and that block page is completely brandable and customizable, so you can change that to say exactly what you would like. Now the nice thing about using DNS here is firstly, obviously, you only have to implement it on the DNS server, but also it's completely protocol agnostic, right? So it doesn't matter if somebody is trying to visit a site on port 80 or port 443, or somebody's already infected with something that you're not aware of, and they're trying to make an SSH connection out to a domain or a particular name. Then we will see that DNS resolution come through, and we can reply as we need to and provide you full insight into what we've seen there. So the other thing is it's not a rip and replace technology, so we don't need to immediately remove what you have to put this in. We can obviously just put it onto a DNS server, and when we say perfect for problem networks, we're talking about networks that unmanaged devices connect to as well. So some great examples are things like the retail space, the hospitality space, where you have guest wireless, or educational environments, universities, schools, etc., where you provide wireless access, and students can connect things like their own phones or laptops, etc. You can't intercept HTTPS in that environment because their device isn't going to trust your certificate, so it makes it very difficult. So using DNS, we're able to actually protect across protocols in those kind of environments as well. So I wanted to, at this point, actually show you the console, which I'm sure everyone would like to see. So I'm going to fire up I may need to reshare. No, I think that's okay. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to use one of these test accounts that I've created. So this is the login page to our system, and I have an example account here. Actually, the whole system is multi-tenanted as well, which that kind of showed those multiple entries I have. So in an environment where perhaps you run the main environment, but you want to provide autonomy to certain departments or certain regions or arms of a business, you can absolutely do that while maintaining overall control using that. So this is a DNS customer. I don't have any reporting data in here, but I can show you a different account with that shortly. But I just wanted to show you how simple it is to set up DNS. So effectively, there's a couple of steps to DNS. The first thing we have to do is add your locations. So anywhere that you would make DNS requests from, so typically your external IP addresses, you can add into locations here. And we can add that via an IPv4 address or an IPv6 address or range, or even a host name. So if you have satellite sites, which you see a lot in things like the construction industry, as long as you can utilize dynamic DNS, we can provide DNS security that way. So you provide a location, and then basically all you have to do is choose what you'd like to allow and block in that location. So firstly, we can enforce safe search, and then you can say, actually, what kind of a policy would I like to apply? And you'll see we have all the categories and subcategories here. You can say, actually, I don't want anybody accessing any of these legal liability categories on that network. So you can just hit the plus button here and it will block all of them. You may say, actually, gambling is not a big issue, so I'm going to allow that. So you can come in and edit the policy as you please. In terms of security risks, this is where some of those advanced categories I was talking about are. So the zero-day phishing, the zero-day malware, and the command and control and cryptocurrency mining are the sort of updated constantly ones, but we also have some categories to hold phishing sites that we're aware of and spam sites, etc. as well. And any site serving malware too, right? So we have a whole list of sites here in the security risks category, and you can build out as many different policies as you like. When you've got yourself a base level policy, you can save it as, which is making a copy. You can actually block applications in here as well. So you might say, well, as a rule, we're going to allow file sharing, but nobody on that network should be using Dropbox, for example. So Dropbox, we're going to block, and DropSend, we're going to block. So you can throw those into that list and they will override here. So even though I think file sharing is one of these, there's a category for it in one of these, even if that's allowed, we're still going to block Dropbox and block DropSend based on this policy. And then you've got your own custom categories. So there's always going to be exceptions. So if somebody says, hey, no, I really need to access this anonymizing site, it's part of a research project I'm doing, then you can absolutely allow access to that particular site just by adding it into an allow list here. So these are policy objects, and you create those, and then you can simply apply those to locations. So right now, that's the only location I have. So I've applied this policy called security to that location. I could equally say, if you come from anywhere else, you also get the security policy. Or I could say there's another site that I need to add, and I'm going to give it a different policy. And if I add it, then obviously it appears in the list. So that's the whole user interface side of setting it up. And then in terms of actually getting traffic to it, you just need to send your DNS requests to our DNS servers. So there are a few different DNS servers that we do have. I'm going to just give you an example here with a Windows DNS server. Let me just grab the password for it here. So let's go into this. This is one just running on AWS that I made earlier. But you see this is a Windows DNS server. So all we have to do is on your DNS server, once you've added the external IP address, go into the forwarders and change that to us. Now, I've only put one IP in here, but we have multiple DNS servers. So you can have a primary, secondary, tertiary, etc. And once you've dropped that in there, all the DNS requests will come to us. And if you then try and request a site that's an anonymizer, you'll be provided back with a block page. So that's it in terms of indentation from a DNS piece. So I won't go into any more detail on that side of things. But what I would like to quickly show you guys is just the kind of reporting that you get out of this, which I'll just show you on a different account. Bear with me quickly. Because obviously providing back to the business actually the value that the solution is giving is important. So we designed a whole host of reports. So here we go. We have a look in here. So firstly, there's a security dashboard, which you saw very briefly in the DNS side of things. So this is actually across our email security solution and our web security solution. So we're saying we've blocked 19 attempts to rescue websites. From here, you can drill down into those websites. We've blocked some phishing sites, malware sites, we've blocked spam emails, etc. So you can drill down from here, but the more detailed reporting is under the actual reports area. So just a couple of example reports I'd like to show is the user browse time report. So once you have the solution implemented, we can tell you who your top browsing users are here, and where the top categories we're seeing from your environment is, and the top domains that we see from your environment. And you can actually drill down, so you can say, actually, I'm only interested in what this particular user does. So you can click on them and get a full visibility of that particular user, as well as a breakdown per day. And you can export this as well and send it to their line manager or whoever you need to send that to. So that's one of the reports. Another great high-level report that we have is the cloud applications piece. So I mentioned, I showed you before, we can block all the different applications. That's useful, but arguably what's more useful is getting visibility of which applications are being used. So if a department has decided to go off and purchase some kind of cloud application to solve a problem, what you might call shadow IT, this report here will give you visibility of that. So, I mean, this is a fairly normal environment. We've seen some data on Facebook Messenger and Twitter and Skype. If you suddenly see a whole host of data on Dropbox and it's not blocked, that's interesting. You can actually come across and you can say, actually, I want to know which users are using a particular application. Decided not to work that time. There we go. So I want to see which users are using Facebook Messenger. It will actually show me who the users are, and those are the people I need to go and talk to, or perhaps maybe I just want to block Facebook Messenger, which you can absolutely do through policy. So I think that's all I wanted to go through today. Hopefully that's given you a flavor of what we can offer on the web and DNS side of things, and how simple it is to improve your security posture using our cloud solution. Obviously, we can go into a whole host more detail. You'll notice there's a whole bunch of things I've not gone through in the user interface. So, I mean, if you'd like to follow up, then please just get in contact with whoever invited you to the webinar, and we can follow up and go into a bit more detail. So, thank you for your time this morning. And unless any of my colleagues have got anything to close off with, I think we can close off the webinar at this point.
Yeah, no, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody. Thank you, Stuart. Really appreciate that overview. Of course, between ourselves at Cyren and the team over at AIT, we'll be reaching out to you all with a follow-up after the WebEx. Of course, if there's any questions or anything, then we can address those then. From looking online, I don't see that we've had any particular questions that have come through, either online or nobody's raised their hand to ask anything in particular. So at that point, I'd like to say again, thank you for joining us this morning, and we will reach out to you all within due course. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, team.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye, everyone.